So before doing anything on Excel, you need to design your table. So you need to think about what your IV is, how many measurements you're going to need to take, which measurements, which calculations. The vast majority of you are going to have two components to your independent variable. So say two different exposures of beaches. And in that situation, rather than having, because you'll then do maybe 30 or 40 different measurements, rather than having a table which has the independent variable in the first column, you flip it. So the independent variable are the rows. So let's imagine that your independent variable is exposure. So that means you've got two columns. You're going to take 30 measurements. You're going to measure the height and the width. And then you're going to need to calculate the ratio, the mean, and the standard deviation. Okay, so you've done your thinking. So then what's your table going to look like? So you'll have maybe Jetty Beach and Castle Beach. Okay, now what you need to make sure is that you've got a gap between them. You must also make sure that you do not have numbers down here, okay, because that would be incorrect. Then you're going to have height, width, and ratio. Height, width, and ratio, whatever your measurements are. And then what you're going to then have is you're going to have some cells down here. Sorry, that's ugly. So you're going to have mean and standard deviation. Okay, like that. Okay, and then the same here, mean, because you only need to calculate the mean and the standard deviation of your process data. So you don't need to do it for the height and the width. You can just do it for the ratios. Okay, so then let's have a think about how we're going to do this. So we're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 columns across. And then that's going to be 1, 2, and then probably sort of 30-ish. And then another 1, 2, so about 34 rows down. Okay, so then when you come to making your table in Excel, you'll get your Excel up here. Sorry, I made a mistake. And so we're going to have 1, 2, 3 rows for Jetty. So if I put Jetty Beach in here, now I could just leave it like that and just have it as the middle cell of a thing, but that looks really ugly. So what we're then going to do is we're going to select all 3. You're going to come up here to that little button there with the arrow which says the merge and center button, and click on it, and that will then merge those cells. Then we're going to come over here and we're going to do the same for Castle Beach, say, and then you'll merge your 3 things there, merge and center. Okay, now this one here, this one in the middle, it doesn't need to be this big, so we can just make it a little bit smaller by doing that. Then what we have is we're going to have our height, our width, and our ratio. Then we're going to have our height, our width, and our ratio. And then I'm not going to go down 30 columns because 30 rows because you're not going to be able to see it. But then I'm going to put mean and then standard deviation there. And then I'm going to put mean and standard deviation there. Now, are we done? No, we absolutely are not done, because we've got all sorts of things that we need to add. So the first thing we need to think about is we need to make sure that we have added our unit. So up here, Jetty Beach, well, the independent variable is exposure, so we need to put the exposure in. So BES, so Ballantine Exposure Scale, and it's got a Ballantine's Exposure Scale of 6. And then Castle Beach, so then we're going to have BES 4. Okay, so that's that one. And actually, I'll put a space in between the BES and the 4. So then our height is measured in something. So our height is measured in millimeters. And then we're going to want to insert our symbols for our mathematical symbol. Okay, so we're going to want to insert our plus or minus like that. because we're going to want to put in the uncertainty, so say 0.005, for example. Okay, so we'll just do that and that. Okay, and then you'll do the same here. I'm actually just going to cheat and I'm just going to copy it across here. It's not cheating, it's just being sensible, so I'm just going to do that. Except it's not letting me, so never mind, millimeters. And then again, you get, let's just do it again. So you go to symbols, symbol, and then insert that. Okay, insert and then close and then 0.05. Okay, and you do that every time. Now, this has done something weird here. It's made that a much bigger value. So what I'm just going to do is I'm going to come back to that in a bit. So we'll do that across all of these values. So I should be able to copy that now into here. So height, millimeters, and then control that, and then width, millimeters, and do that. The ratio doesn't have a unit, so we can leave that. Your mean will also be a mean of a ratio, so that doesn't have a unit, and the standard deviation is standard deviation for unit, and that doesn't have a unit anyway. Okay, so now we're done, right? No, because it still looks ugly. So the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to select the whole thing, and we're going to go to home, and we're going to put borders everywhere. Okay, then because it's done something weird with the something really weird with the text size there, so I'm just going to make sure that everything is size 11, just because that's then easy. Now we still have a problem because these cells are spanning over the width. So there are a number of things that you can do here. Either you can go here, and you see how my cursor changes from being an arrow to being this little square thing, and you can double click there, and it will then jump to be the size of the size of the column. Okay, now you could do it like that, okay, like this, but that makes for quite wide columns, which doesn't necessarily matter. It just entirely depends on how much space you've got in your page. What you could do is you could do that, and you could then click on this button here, which is wrap text, and then you could just move it so the uncertainty goes below, and then you just double click there, and you can just fiddle about with it until it looks how you want it to look. Okay, I need to put a space in there because otherwise it's going to look odd. Okay, so that's, you can just sort of faff about with that and make them look good. But you want to try and make sure that your column widths are kind of, they don't need to be exactly the same, but you want them to be sort of almost the same. Okay, so you can do that. The other thing that you can do is down here, do you see what that's done is made that not work? So you want to wrap text there so that then you've got the standard deviation like that. And then what you might want to do is start thinking about the overall formatting. So then what we do is we come down here and we're going to put a thicker border around that one. Then we're going to put a thicker border around there. Maybe we want to demarcate where the means and the standard deviations are. So then we're going to put a thicker border there. And then what you might be like is this middle column, you don't actually want that to look like it's got cells in it because it's just space. So what we do is you go back here and we go no border, and then we just go thick outside border, and there you've got it. And you could do the same. You could do the same here if you wanted to. And that is how you set up your table.